But I think the interesting thing is not AGI or ASI. None of those things don't really matter. It's how much can we automate and when. And I think the answer is like already today, we can automate a lot. Maybe it's more like helps humans, like human driven in a way. But like what's clear is we will be able to automate a crazy amount of stuff. And that's going to be commercially very impactful. It's going to really change how like society works without any new breakthroughs, without anything really besides adoption.
It's not even just automate. Basically, how much can this thing do for me that either I couldn't do the same or I couldn't do it cheaper or faster? But it doesn't necessarily automation, right? It could be just you need a sounding wall to rubber duck problem, right? And the suggestions may be completely wrong, but that's the thing with rubber ducks, right? You just want some input to look at things in a different way. That by itself could have value, even though it's not running automated or autonomously and is just reacting to input that you get. The more things like that we can throw at it, the more interesting it gets.
Like any improvement that's not really pushing the frontiers of engineering and science is still very peripheral improvement. Maybe you get 0.5% out of this thing more. But if you can actually like make progress on real science like that, then you start to get like pretty great outcomes.
But this comes back to Ricardo's point. Whether the LLM makes progress or the LLM sort of frees time for a human to make progress, there's not much difference in terms of progress. And we're live once again for a very, very special episode because I screwed all kinds of things up. And so I'm temporarily recording this from our office and don't have my microphone. So we'll see how the headphone microphone holds up.
I do appreciate how you seem to be intent on starting these things by reminding everybody how much of a fly by the seat of our pants they are. It's very in character.
Yeah, you know how like all these podcasts where it's basically just like an interviewer and then like a person they're interviewing, they're actually in the background, they've got like a staff of 10 people doing all kinds of things. This is in some ways the opposite of that. This is shoddily put together content for granted an extremely large audience, but
okay, this is going to be probably an obscure reference for cinephiles, but we're kind of like the dogma of crypto podcasts, basically.
Yeah. But before we started recording, we were just about to start discussing the new robot. So they did a big announcement, obviously very, very controversial. For the uninitiated, it's a robot they're selling for about 20K or 500 a month. Oh, it's pre-order now. They're not selling it yet. And basically it's meant for your home. So it's a robot that in theory can do all kinds of home things. And the funny part about it, which we can discuss briefly, is I think they had two things that the robot could do autonomously. One was open a door, and the other one was like take a cup to somewhere. And everything else could do via remote control. So there's a physical human with a VR headset somewhere who will be peering into your home and being creepy in various ways. So what did you guys think about that? And how excited are you to have surveillance robots in your home?
I definitely want a poorly vetted individual controlling a remote machine that can walk into my bedroom while I sleep and do shit. Sounds like a brilliant idea. Having said that, that is two more things that it can do autonomously than the Tesla Optimus can do. So that's progress, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to steel man this, as someone who may have invested in one of the rounds, Like, I guess it's gonna look pretty weird and ugly in the beginning, and the question is, how do you make progress? And the way to make progress is to get training data on stuff, and like, I guess there's like no conceivable path. It's super hard to like actually generate data from the real world into one of these things. So like, it's kind of the same thing as Tesla taking, the top 1% of drivers or something and prioritizing that information for years in their kind of machine learning stuff. And that works as the basis of the self-driving. So that hopefully is the path here. I mean, it is pretty strange to have someone, I do think there's like a way to permission it. Like, it's not, it's from the user side. But
I mean, hopefully there's an off switch.
yeah. But like, I don't know, like, I guess what are your options here in terms of how you get to this? I mean, how bullish are you guys on just like this end goal? Like, do you see this as like, okay, humanoid robots is a thing, it'll be awesome, and like 2047 is here, and is it like everyone has one in their home, or are you kind of like short the idea?
I'm not short the idea of having autonomous help around the house. I'm not entirely sure that humanoid robots are going to be the best approach. I think that we're starting there mostly because the spaces right now are designed for humans to move around by and large. But I don't necessarily think that that is the optimal way to navigate a place. I think it's a lot more likely that we will get. I would be more bullish on specialized devices for different sections, right? Like at some point there was this concept video of a bed where kind of like the posts of the bed were arms that help the bed. Like this kind of thing to me makes a lot more sense as an end goal, or something that just works on the kitchen space, right? That's the kind of thing that I would expect. Kind of like small independent specialized robots, more than one humanoid thing that takes care of, all the laundry that you'll be lying around and all that shit.
That feels like a very bearish view of like where tech is going, because you kind of have a toaster already, and you can kind of abuse your coffee machine. But then
but that's not the only thing you do. You need
something which overarching, which is able to do everything, and like, it doesn't like have to be exactly humanoid. I mean, there is like an argument for like forearms or something, but in some sense, like maximum dexterity makes sense as like a baseline for something to be able to do various tasks.
And I would argue that human shape is not maximum dexterity. If you have articulate arms that come out of your bed, for instance, that is maximum dexterity. What you want to do is move a whole bunch of clothes around and hold them from different angles.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give my take before we get way too deep into this. Obviously, the reason they're doing it is because they need a huge volume of data, and this is really the only way to do that. It is going to be like interesting to see how many people are actually willing to basically get help to get over this hump, because this transition period is pretty weird and pretty creepy. But on the other hand, people do all kinds of creepy shit. So I don't know, like probably their smart TV is listening to them and shit.
Well, if they have a Samsung, it definitely is.
Exactly. So we'll see. Like, I think this is maybe a little bit too in your face compared to a lot of these other ways that they're being surveilled, but like, we'll see how that goes. In regards to like the humanoid thing, so I'm kind of two minds. Like one way of looking at it is what Ricardo was saying. Like, the humanoid form factor, in some sense, like, yes, the world is designed for humanoids, but the optimal form factor for even operating in this world, that's unclear. On the other hand, regarding generalizability, I think it's hard to argue that like general solutions would be bad. Like, so if we look at AI is very general. And like you have all these kind of, I guess you could say that the generalized solution always like it is maybe a little bit hard to get perfect and like is inefficient in many ways. But it is, I think, somewhat of a trend that like the very generalized solutions tend to work quite well. And like your options are to get like 90% of the stuff done with a single purchase versus 95% of the stuff done with 10 different purchases. Like I think there's an argument to be made that having that general capability is actually quite useful. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily needs to be humanoid. And I do think there's a little bit of like this iRobot movie driven culture that has led to everyone going so hard in this specific direction. But like I can see the promise. I think the bigger question regarding all of these is kind of the timing of it. So, everyone's going very hard now. They're like, yes, we need data, like blah blah blah. But what is the pace from here to like actual autonomy on any level, and that's sort of like useful? And I think the answer might be that it's like a really long way. Like I think the sort of the data from interacting with the real world in a physical way, I think is like orders of like a ridiculous amount of data that you need. The amount of edge cases that exist even in a simple situation, like you're just picking something up, is crazy. And I don't think the LLMs and kind of the current state of AI is like directly translatable into that. So not only might you need like huge amounts of data, you might need like breakthroughs in algorithms. And so these things are a bit of a concern. I'm mainly saying this from the perspective of like, it's possible that we get this first crop of robots, like remote controlled robots, essentially. And then this whole thing dies for quite a while. And then at some point it kind of reemerges. Like it might be the same kind of trajectory that we had with neural networks, which is like really it took 40 years or something like that. And there were like many periods of some progress and people got excited and then it kind of flattened out. And then again, like some progress, and then eventually it sort of hits some inflection point where it becomes broadly quite useful. And if that's the case, then I think pretty much all of these first iterations are doomed to fail, like Google Glass style.
Yeah, look, I definitely agree that the generalized solution is more likely to be the solution than a very specific, a very case specific thing. Like I don't think you're just gonna have a thing that does your dishes, right? I just don't necessarily think that generalized solution is going to be humanoid. For instance, if
No, we already have Roombas. We already have Roombas. We already have robots with some level of autonomy.
But I mean, you
like
whether or not it's like the perfect generalization device, like there may be an advantage to it just because like that's the data is easier to get from like humans who are controlling by that thing or something like that. Like, and it's probably close enough, like, oh, is it optimal to have 6 arms instead of 2, or be able to spin your head in a certain way, or like stuff like that. It seems like marginal. Or not marginal, but like you'll get the point probably done for most tasks with like a human form.
Possibly, but it's also less resilient. Anyway, the one reason why if you're just looking at history, why I wouldn't necessarily bet on this being the final form, is because if we look at pretty much any implementation of tech, whatever it is, the first version is always skeuomorphic because that's what's familiar to us. And then we start specializing into shit that actually gets the job done much better in a native manner. It wouldn't surprise me if the first few iterations of this are a humanoid robot, and this gets us enough information about how to navigate spaces and how to, I don't know, best put dishes from one place to another, whatever. And then 3-4 generations down the road, this is actually split into, I don't know, 4 starfish-like things with a manipulator arm that just move around, moving stuff in your house, right? Not just a single symmetrical body plan thing that looks like just weird.
One really kind of obvious downside of the humanoid form is that carrying anything is like an intensely fine motor skill exercise. And there's like a very simple solution is like instead of a humanoid, you could have like a moving table, and suddenly that's not a problem. So I buy that. Like I buy that general thing, but then if you think about it from like a cultural perspective, it could be that actually like there's a reason why we start skeuomorphic, and then there's like almost like I don't know this for sure, but I can intuitively it seems like it might be possible that actually you have to have the skeuomorphic version first for it to kind of be accepted in society, and then you can move beyond that.
It's not just that it's accepted, because actually I suspect that people would have an easier time reasoning about accepting a moving table than they would not quite person thing, because there's no uncanny value with the moving table, right? You can reason about that as a thing. I think it's just easier for us because we are not changing that many things at once. We're just changing one thing, which is this is now a robot that can do a thing, and this is now a and everything else is remotely. Then we change another thing, which is that now more things are remote, are autonomous, etc. It's kind of like there's, for instance, no particular reason why the current version. I just pretend that this is still a crypto podcast. there's no particular reason why the first version of, say, Aave wouldn't have been the sort of full resources thing that we have now, right? The first version of Aave was a very much traditional loan book thing back when it was called Lend or whatever it was, because that is what was familiar. Yeah, and that's what was familiar, right? And then we figure out like we get data and we were like, oh no, this approach actually worked better. There was no particular natural way why that would work. It was just what was familiar, and I think that's what's going on here as well.
Both of you, I think I'm hinting at this, but apart from just what exact form it is or whatever, or the amount of data that it's able to collect, the big barrier here is just this seems so far from working in a practical sense. Like if you take kind of a view where LLMs very much struggle to do even like a basic human's job in some sense, like some narrow tasks and some specific stuff that can be good at to kind of support you, but it's very difficult for it to like take someone's job because it just can't navigate kind of basic stuff in a work environment. And this is like 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times worse problem. And like, if you take the kind of evolutionary sense where LLMs start to be pretty good at stuff where it's kind of very recent in terms of like how you've evolved to do a bit of mathematics or something or play StarCraft. But then this is like 1 billion years of just getting this thing, like the video of it, like trying to build a washing machine. So interesting because just like kind of getting texture and understanding how you react to the amount of force you apply to picking up a fork or an egg versus like something else. It's so complicated actually. And it feels like we're just like orders of magnitude away. But it's again like orders of magnitude. It's unclear what this rate of progress is. And right now, I mean, capitalism is pushing this as hard as anything in human history in some sense to go forward. And yes, there are like in LLMs, for example, yes, there are new techniques and kind of breakthrough papers and stuff like that, but it's also just like compute you can explain 99% of the progress by more compute. So like I don't know where this plateaus and like, is this within the realm of, there is like a huge difference of, is this in the realm of stuff that actually works in 5 years, or is this truly like 40 years out? And I don't even have a good intuition on like which one it's supposed to be.
Yeah. In some ways, I don't think it matters. It's kind of like space travel. Like we should try. I'm very like positive about trying. One thing I just want to like point at a little bit is that I think what I find about a bit weird about this, is, specifically the focus on the home. Like this whole remote controlled thing, no one would have any issue with if it was in a work environment.
Does Boston Robotics pretty much have the industry and military side of things covered? I
Here
think
does,
that home
right?
is the
East
only one
Coast.
that doesn't.
It's no. Well, okay, so we can touch on this. What was it? Boston Dynamics does have all kinds of this stuff. Yes, Amazon is doing their own. There's a bunch of others doing their own, and I understand that, like, okay, like you wanna, like, in some ways the real mass market is in the home, but I do think that like you could take it further in another environment before trying to introduce it into the home, where the issues of having something remote controlled by a random person just don't really exist in the same way. And so I think like you could get to like a baseline of training data via other means, and like how different ultimately is some other context to developing these fine motor skills. I would argue that really it doesn't matter what context the robot is in, if it's interacting with the physical world, like, and unless it's in a very constrained, like doing something very specific.
But
That's
like,
where it was.
and if it's like loading a washing machine, is just being able to do anything essentially.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Like, so the point is like, even let's take even not like in a factory where yes, the scope is very constrained often. Let's just take like, you want this to be like the doorman at a hotel, or like, at the office to do, like, you can do the same act or actions in different contexts where the privacy concern is like a totally different thing. And that's maybe what I find a little bit weird. And I'm sure there's all kinds of competitive dynamics which are pushing them to do it this way. But,
I look
founder
at
of
it
is asked about this, and I think his answer is essentially, yeah, it is kind of weird that like some people will do it, and that is part of the social contract, as he said, of doing it. And I don't know, like I don't judge that in some sense, like it is. I wouldn't do it necessarily, but like, hey, like if you want to do that, like it's a free world, and if enough people want to do that to make a significant difference to the rate of progress here, that's just all the better for me eventually, down the line.
I mean,
not to pick on stuff, but would you really describe this as a free world?
Okay, no, but in this sense, the people have freedom to do this action, and they should be allowed to, like, as opposed to
people get to choose the privacy invasion tool they bring into their home.
no,
Their brand,
bedroom, like
they get to choose the brand of tool. They get to pick the brand and price point for their wiretap nowadays. Now, being completely cynical, Teemu, I would say that one of the reasons why you would target the consumer market is because it sounds like a larger addressable space. And look, if this gets mass adoption, it's going to grow like GPT numbers and OpenAI and yeah. Whereas if you start telling, we are first getting data from industry, which is arguably the best approach, right? For me, the Microsoft HoloLens should actually not have started as a consumer device. It should have started very much of an industrial device. But if you start there, then the investors are going to ask you, well, how many units are you actually going to sell? What does that teach you? And, isn't this a very constrained environment? What if somebody else beats you to market? And at that point, you don't raise at the multiples that you probably raise otherwise. So just the cynical approach is that it's a better market for for selling into investors.
How about this as an idea is, let's assume all these competitors essentially have like, the people always compare the LLMs, but from the endpoint consumer perspective, they use ChatGPT because that became like a synonym for this. And the models are honestly close enough that for those kinds of use cases, no one really cares. So here, what if you're saying essentially that, okay, I assume all of us and our competitors, there'll be like some marginal differences, but it will essentially be at the same place at all times or so close to each other that it doesn't really matter. And what we want to get is the kind of virality of effect of people, like when you meme about this thing, like of like this thing shacking up with your wife, it is our robot, that is in that meme. And you kind of are synonymous with that. And you just like, it's a way to push distribution essentially. I'm like kind of steel manning the direct case, but you know what I mean? Like there is an argument here, I think, which is that everyone essentially is on the same line at all times to any practical degree, which means that kind of other factors.
Like every single robot is running on the same NVIDIA tech, right? Like it's the differentiation. It's going to be tricky. But to move on a little bit, I do think there's I think we're at an interesting point in history in some ways. So we have like AI working in like, I would say like nothing to do with AGI. Like I think, everyone should just remove that term from their heads, but we have AI working, and really it's just like improving its determinism, kind of like optimizing its use problem at this point. We have AR like here, essentially, like we've found the form factor finally. Got to give it to them. Meta figured it out, which of all places, like Meta's new AR glasses, I think are going to be like incredibly popular. The previous generation was really just like a camera and a microphone and speakers, and those were already super popular. Now you're going to have a screen in that form factor, like that. People will get there.
And what didn't Google Glass already have that? Google Glass already had a heads-up display. So
yeah. But this is like Google Glass's heads-up display was like similar to what you get in like cars. This is like kind of like a full display, but
we can extend 10, 12 years ago, man. I mean,
I'm not arguing it. I'm just saying Google Glass isn't a mainstream head product, and Meta's glasses are. Regarding at the same time, we have crypto like entering a completely different phase in its cycle. We have a lot of institutional adoption, blah 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 blah, and there's this big push towards robotics. The space stuff seems to be progressing pretty well. Like holistically, the technology industry is like, I think, in a really interesting spot where it feels like everything is working kind of simultaneously, I guess, which is a bit surprising, I think. And then this is sort of counterbalanced by the general economy almost globally, like a lot of the sort of grassroots stuff not looking very good in many ways. There's a lot of wars going on and escalation everywhere, blah, blah, blah. So I'm curious to hear your takes on just like what, where do you think we are in 10 years? Because I think like predicting out beyond 10 years is already like pretty much impossible. 10 years might be impossible, but it feels like 10 years progress with what's going on currently might lead to like a dramatically different world. And just to add one more thing, like at the same time, Chinese scientists have managed to use stem cells to reverse aging in monkeys that are closest physiological equivalent to humans, not slowed down, not stopped, reversed. So neurodegenerative like neurological degeneration reversed, a bunch of tissue deterioration reversed, and like almost any field you look at, you have like something like this. Like soon, God forbid, somebody cracks fusion and like quantum in the next 5 years, then we'll have everything. So what is the thought cause?
I'm not sure. The picture is kind of half true to me, which is in the kind of areas which I don't think are kind of illegal to make progress in. So crypto, AI, and robotics are probably the best three. Like you actually do have like a pretty clear runway, and in each of those you'll probably make enough progress that it feels like tech progress is kind of happening very quickly. But then the kind of real life side, and there I would put space I would put, and then life extension I would put there, and then energy/nuclear I'd put there. Like it does seem like a pretty big slog and still in those, like the rate of progress in like life extension, for example, is so much worse than it should be.
That's true, but don't you think that space progress is actually really fast?
I think that space progress it looks fast, but I also suspect, based on what little I know about the area, that this is an area where you need to make. Okay, let me first differentiate it with life extension. Here's the thing: if you extend my lifespan by 10 years, this probably gets me to the next improvement, that gets me to the next improvement, that gets me to the next improvement. That's an area where incremental changes can make a massive difference. I suspect that space exploration is more of an area where you have step changes, where we make a lot of changes that gets us to our immediate vicinity. Then the next change is not going to be, populating the moon or whatever. The next change is going to be something significantly more massive. It's going to require a significant leap. It's not just going to be a 10%, 20% improvement. That's why I wouldn't be making any major bets on changes on the space exploration kind of thing for the next 10 years. Whereas the other sides, the other aspects that you brought up, do seem like things that lend themselves significantly better for small improvements compounding over the same period of time.
Can I comment just quickly? Like I think like in light of the data and mainly SpaceX, like space progress is incredibly fast. Like the amount of basically like payload that's going up into orbit is increased dramatically. And will continue to increase. Reusability is a big unlock. Like we can quibble about things, but the thing is, wait. Space exploration, I don't think is held back by regulatory problems, as far as SpaceX is concerned, at least. Life extension, on the other hand, is held back by regulatory problems in the West, but yes, in some way is going full speed. And I think in life extension, and we don't need to get too deep into specifics, like I think there's a chance that the vast majority of life extension research is very like incremental improvement. If we figure out how to do this sort of pretty generically with stem cells, I think that's which we have indications of. Like stem cells are quite widely used for a variety of use cases. And now we have more and more data that there's like, we could kind of use them for anything maybe. That's like a much bigger unlock. Like we're not talking about an incremental improvement. We're talking about like almost unlimited reversal. Yeah. Yes.
It's also very difficult to tell which one of these relies on like how much incremental improvement versus which one has low hanging fruit. Like the argument for life extension working super well is there should be low hanging fruit there because we've done such a bad job of exploring that. But I would say these industries are a little bit different from the sense that like the kind of non-illegal ones, they make progress regardless of who's in the game. Like it's just like the economics of the thing is driving it and the kind of momentum is driving it. But like the like as for space, we're reliant on the kind of one rich asshole problem so much at the moment, and we're not like we wouldn't be able to make progress on that without like very specific people in this world at the moment, which may be true for all of history, for all of tech in some sense, but like, but the like
But it's a big, just to
these things are all moving forward. Like there's differences in the dynamics of all these industries and how it like blah blah blah. But like simultaneously, it does, unless half of it's fake, which who knows. But like it seems like there's like dramatic progress happening across a large amount of verticals.
more bullish on life extension in the sense that you brought up, like regulatory arbitrage there from other countries. That's the only reason it makes progress. If the world was like us, like we wouldn't make any progress on that. And it would be a huge shame. Like,
but it's not, man. It's the game theory works out. Like,
look, Timo, the thing with the space progress is that everything that you said is true, but mostly what that does is it makes the current thing, the thing we're doing currently right now more efficient, right? This may create some changes in the next 10 years. Like, I don't know, maybe you get to launch your own satellite, for instance, or maybe you get to do a low orbit flight easily. Maybe this makes country to country travel cheaper. Who knows, right? What I don't see happening in that period is, the Mars pipe dream or anything like that. Because there's a great line from Zach Weinersmith and technically Weinersmith on the City on Mars, where they basically make the point that there's nothing we could do to Earth right now that would make it less hospitable to human life than Mars is. So before we actually get to the next step level increase, which would be not just getting shit into space cheaper, but actually settling somewhere else, which would be a massive unlock. I think that we actually need to be able to do some sort of stuff here that on this planet that proves that we can actually build those habitats, like an underwater cities or something else. But then that's why I would, again, be more bullish on the other things.
But, okay, we don't need to get caught up too much on this, but I think with regards to space, I wouldn't underestimate like an order of magnitude decrease in cost as like a driving function for new use cases. Could be wrong. But anyway, like it seems like okay, maybe we can move on to crypto, whatever stuff. But
and we actually name dropped crypto briefly twice in the two sections.
we did. But I think like it feels to me like it's guaranteed that we're going to live through a very interesting period in history, in good and in bad. That's kind of like where we're at.
Yeah, man. Yes, where we're going to be.
like there's some like kind of more catastrophic risk potential with just kind of more capability, but people talk about, there's all these conflicts in the world and stuff like that, and that's true, but not really if you look at the chart, like the kind of like the rate at which wars happen and how many people die in them is like pretty much down only, and like even if you take out modern conflicts, they haven't been anything as large for a long time. And I have pitched the Fukuyama end of history, like it's all just kumbaya from here, and we're just gonna make tech progress, and I generally think that's correct.
We might be at the end of history, just not in a positive way. Man, while I agree on that generally speaking on the purely numbers thing is because before the say World War I, World War II, you just threw bodies at the problem and so what happened, right? The thing that concerns me right now is the scale, the frequency, the fact that you have nuclear armed powers sprattling the saber at each other in ways that hasn't happened before. And that is a situation where one fuck up can cost you a lot more than 100,000 people kill each other in trenches, who knows where, like 10 hours flight from you, right? That is the kind of thing that can have global consequences. So I would agree that we are in a sketchy time. This is definitely not a humanity up only from here situation by and
I
large.
mean, it is like kind of Bostrom, like, oh, someone asked the LLM to make them a virus like that they can make it with home equipment and chemicals that kind of goes through, like, which is like a genuine concern in some sense, because if it is possible, then that you almost are bound to realize a future like that in some sense, because it's like the one asshole problem. Like, eventually, we about this in like a more elegant fashion, except like, yeah,
Eventually you might get there, but actually if you look at all the stories of people that go down like the LLM brain rot, I think this is one area where the current LLMs being so full of shit and so good at the sycophantic nonsense helps us as humanity, generally speaking, where basically these people are a lot more convinced that they are getting to some progress, while it's just the LLM like running them around in circles. And if we are going to get fucked by a virus, we're a lot more likely to get fucked by someone with the right knowledge who decides to release something they shouldn't have released. Like the 12 monkey scenario, I see a lot more likely that someone building a biolab, something in their homemade biolab, at the very least for the next 10 years. Even though, just to answer Temu's original question, I do suspect that we are going into a Peter White's Fireflies world sort of scenario, which is really fucking terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'll say this about the current LLMs as a positive, which is that if you take the kind of Hinton Bostrom-esque idea of, oh, you should have like a global government sort of Manhattan project to figure out alignment, that's such a fucking stupid idea compared to drip feeding this thing out and seeing what it actually does. And kind of every single step of progress actually being released, or not every single step of progress being released, but you know what I mean? Like, generally the tool is being pushed to the public. That is such a better path for actually figuring out what goes wrong than this kind of ivory tower of academics who think highly of themselves, thinking about something they call an alignment problem, you know, like that. That is just the end of the world if we happen to think about doing things like that.
Well, generally agree.
Spicy take. I think alignment is literally unnecessary and completely made up as a problem.
Exactly, that's what the academics do.
But I think, But I think the thing that I'm gonna somewhat repeat myself, but I think there's like I think people struggle a little bit. I'm not saying you guys, but sort of like there's these two very polar views on the current LLMs. One is like we're right about to have killer robots, and the other is like these things are like completely useless. And I think both of those miss the mark by quite a bit. I think the current LLMs are already good enough for a very large amount of use cases. Like there's some very easy examples. If everyone was using LLMs, how much less would people be paying lawyers? I would argue the percentage is more than 50% less.
Assuming some grounding, yes, not the current use of just throw stuff at ChatGPT and watch it spew up existing arguments. Sure.
Oh no, I just like ask it for a doc for like some sort of M&A transaction.
Boilerplate. Yeah, pay lawyers for.
That I agree with. The issue with that is, and we had a conversation about LLMs at some point in the past. I remember recall if you were here, Mika. I think this was just in Temu. But what I always tell people about LLMs, whatever model they're going to try, is first ask them a lot of questions about the domain that you know a lot about. And then the ratio of mistakes that it makes, that you assume that it's making the same mistakes in other areas, right? The same percentage of mistakes. The issue with legal stuff is that I suspect it's an area that people can really evaluate, which is why I think that that it should have some grounding if people are going to rely on it. But it's not.
That's not the way to think about it, right? So there's a spectrum from it does everything in your legal thing to instead of you ask your lawyers to do everything, you actually have a draft you create yourself with an LLM. It's going to be wrong in some parts. It doesn't know some local law stuff, blah, blah, blah. Which, by the way, I would argue the modern ones are very good at on average by now. And like even obscure, weird tax law, like better than most lawyers you'll find in terms of at least uncovering that information. They might not structure it perfectly in all these, but just that you don't pay your lawyer for the whole end-to-end thing, but you cut out some pieces of it, and then you apply that to whatever the percentage is for each industry. Like, I think it's already a lot. And to be fair, I'm saying, wait, I'm saying these are not that great right now. So the point I'm making is this is incremental progress from here already gets us very far in terms of the commercial impact of LLMs. And I think it's easy to believe in.
But that's exactly what I mean by grounding. If you're saying it uncovers this thing, that means that it brings up this resource and then it processes it for you. If people get used to expect grounding from these things, where it goes in, gets a whole bunch of documents for you, then spits them out in a sensible way, that's great.
I think you're making this way too complicated. It's like if people think about it this way, and if they do it, like it doesn't matter. Like people are gonna do this. Like
of the same type of thinking that you just mentioned. It's just how people are kind of obsessed about this moment of when is it AGI? When is it AGI? Kind of that's like a thing that people talk about. And there's this interesting, for example, the guy who, and I'll try to not misrepresent his position, but the guy who makes the ARC AGI test, the Francois, whatever his name is. Like, it's interesting. I think he has a pretty inconsistent worldview in one sense, which is like, he's saying that, the models are kind of like useless now, and there's very difficult to see the path for them to get to the finish line. And then he says that this is why like AI is a bubble. And then when you ask him, when does like AGI hit, which AGI to him and as a term in this sense, like pure labor saving, pure like GDP growth to the moon, yada, yada. And he's like, in 5 years. And it's like, really, man? Like, well, then it's not a bubble. Then it's not overvalued if your timeline is 5 years. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's a incredible inconsistency in the view. Like people play these, like, my point is, like, to your point, people play these games of like very, very extreme behaviors when even the guy who's saying like, this is useless is like, in 5 years, which is a super bullish timeline. Like, I didn't see timeline to say for AGI. And it's like, how can you hold that view as well? Like, like it's, I don't know, like that's the kind of oscillating back and forth that people go with such like extreme, behavior when it's just like incremental progress gets you quite far from here, that's the correct.
Also, I think the term AGI is pretty difficult because it kind of conjures up these like weird images of something with intent. And that's not what it actually means. Like the basic term artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence, like they are kind of like, we can achieve those while the thing looking pretty similar to LLMs today. It's just pretty like just better at all the things, right? But there's no like intent added anywhere. It's not like suddenly like it's no smarter in like some kind of like spiritual sense. It's just a better algorithm. And maybe we need new algorithms for that. Maybe we can continue scaling these to get there. I think continuing scaling with the current structures looks unlikely. Like nowadays people beat benchmarks by like a tiny bit. If they do, it doesn't really make much of a difference. And more of the, it looks to me like more of the sort of current low hanging fruit is around making smaller models much better, and like optimizing your cost structure for inference. And I think that's quite like exciting, but the point is like this whole AGI term is kind of meaningless. Like these things already are like super geniuses. If you like were just like, how many topics do you know something about? Like they're better than any human. They memorize things verbatim much better, et cetera. Like it's meaningless. It doesn't make a difference.
To me, the main, okay, so I'm going to ask you to define intent in a bit, but the main reason why I think the AGI thing is useless is because nobody really defines it. And for everybody, it means something different. And usually it usually is, oh, this is like a person. Like, okay, what does that mean? Oh, like a person, obviously. I mean, it's like a person. What else can it mean? So, and
With agency, right? This is like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we get into a whole, do you actually have agency yourself? Now, this is again, definitely going back to the old thing. This is the skeuomorphic thing. And I do think people would benefit a lot from looking at other systems of intelligence, both in the real world and in fiction, right? Things like collective intelligence in animals, right? Do you consider this particular behavior of a bee colony or of an ant colony to be intelligent for that particular task or not? And then would you say that an ant itself is smart? Things like an octopus that can do things that you probably can't, can process an amount of information from camouflage that we just completely discard as, oh, that's just instinct. Well, we gives a shit, right? It can do stuff. In the same way that you don't necessarily calculate differential equations when you extend your arm to catch a ball that's flying towards you. You just do that thing. It's instinct. It's something you have trained yourself to do. Anyway, that's why I find that term useless. It's just because people don't define it, period. And they don't think in a non-human terms.
Yes, but I think the interesting thing is not AGI or ASI. None of those things don't really matter. It's how much can we automate and when. And I think the answer is like already today, we can automate a lot. Maybe it's more like helps humans, like human driven in a way, but like what's clear is we will be able to automate a crazy amount of stuff, and that's going to be commercially very impactful. It's going to really change how like society works without any new breakthroughs, without anything really besides adoption.
It's not even just automate. Basically, how much can this thing do for me that either I couldn't do the same or I couldn't do it cheaper or faster? But it doesn't necessarily automation, right? It could be just you need a sounding wall to rubber duck problem, right? And their suggestions may be completely wrong, but that's the thing with rubber ducks, right? You just want some input to look at things in a different way, right? That by itself could have value, even though it's not running automated or autonomously and it's just reacting to input that you get. The more things like that we can throw at it, the more interesting it gets.
I have a question for both of you. This is a pretty basic one, but I just don't know where your intuitions are. Well, what about like, yes, all that's true, but what if I go the full kind of crazy route and think AGI is God, kind of AI automates AI research, like, and kind of super takeoff around that and very weird scenarios for how the world and universe looks. Like, what do you say to that? And if you assume the premise is true, like that AI fully automates AI research, like you can ask it, we can ask it to point it to make progress in any way we want, but like essentially, like it'll immediately make insane amount of progress in that field.
That's the thing. Usually, research tends to be directed to have a particular goal. That's why automating AlphaGo, teaching itself to play Go from first principles is easily automatable because there's a goal. It's perfectly possible that AI will automate AI research, and we will end up, again with the Peter Watson, we will end up with something that looks like Rorschach, not like the Rorschach from Blindside, not like a human in any sort of way. That is perfectly possible. I just think that for that to happen, that thing needs to be able to run on its own without as many human preconceptions embedded into the way that it's supposed to happen.
So I think this is another area where it's like a nice, scary kind of thing to state in a short sentence, which is pretty vague. But then if you like try to walk through the steps of what it actually means, it's pretty hard to get there. So what people usually mean is an AI that essentially has access to its own code and can like iterate on itself. And I would say that like looking at it right now, right, like AI is unlikely to make fully functioning production code in all circumstances, so that it needs human assistance regardless. Even if it could, there's like a boundary where it's the current LLMs are essentially averaging the human data set based on a prompt. And so it's somewhat limited to like human capability as it is. And for it to recursively self-improve, it would need to somehow not only optimize its code, but also improve its own model, which then includes data collection. You need synthetic data, which is better, which it can't produce itself. Like, it's very hard to see how that like comes about in a way where we have like a PDOM, like it's just vertical takeoff. And I think a lot of the people that have been spouting that stuff for a while now, like I don't want to be too like general. I don't want to generalize it too much and not be too mean, but I feel like they're not maybe engineers that maybe haven't built things. I don't know, but like it's fairly simple when you walk through the steps to understand that like at least these current systems would not do that. And like if we have a system that could recursively get better with no data or no new data, like then of course that may happen, but like that seems physically impossible. So like in order for anyone to get better, humans and AI included, you need better input. And then you need better algorithms, and then you need to optimize performance and all that stuff. And it's like, it doesn't seem like something that is kind of like inherently possible to do in a recursive type of way. But I don't know. I could be wrong, but like, at least I think the fear that this is going to happen in the near future is like you completely insane. And it's possible that the thought that it could ever happen is also completely insane. It's sort of like, as a thought experiment, like, can God recursively improve himself?
Well, look, again, improve assumes a goal and an external yardstick of some sort. And if we look at this in the
reward functions are goals, right?
Is correct. That's same thing. Potato.
You get very quickly into the paperclip maximizer stuff, but
yeah. But the key thing where I don't necessarily think that it's just going to happen entirely by itself in a vacuum is because regardless of what you think this thing is, it's easier to think of it as yet another species. And no species tends to progress without some sort of external force pushing against it or an external force push against. You just plateau and that's it, because there's no reason to continue improving. So will it work entirely? So no, maybe if you had like a different ecosystems of different things competing for who's the best thing, maybe that would be an external force of sorts. But it's a lot of like people will be in the middle anyway.
Yeah, so like, I think this whole self-recursion thing kind of assumes a model of like improvement and learning that there is really no example anywhere in the universe as far as we know. And so it's like I'm never one to be like 100% sure about anything, because I think, humanity invented the food triangle and soon realize that it's actually the opposite of what we thought it was, and this is bound to happen again and again. But this seems a little bit insane, and I think a lot of these kinds of things, like almost go a little bit onto the side of being religious or spiritual, rather than like pragmatic technology views.
Maybe to ask the pragmatic question, just to get where you guys are, is US GDP growth over the past some years is like 2%-ish, you know? It's higher in some parts of the world sustainably, and some it's not, you know, like in Finland. What do you think? Presumably, like,
Damn it.
presumably you would think that the rate of growth is very much tied to the progress of key few technologies, at least. And if you're bullish on them, presumably you think like GDP growth will be significantly higher at some point. So like, let's say AI does the things you actually wanted to do really well, or I don't know what your expectation is, but like, do you actually foresee in 10 years materially higher GDP growth because of AI or not? And if not, why not?
So Andre Karpathy has, like, I think, an interesting take. I'm not sure I fully agree with him, but I think it's at least food for thought. And basically his position is like, we've been on this trend of automating and increasing productivity since the dawn of time, essentially, like since progress started. And like it's just a continuous trend, and so he doesn't expect to have some like massive bump, and I think like, if you were like far in the future and zoomed out looking at the chart, that would probably be true. Like it's not like there's like this sort of linear growth and then bang up here or anything like that. It like all smooths out kind of over time. At the same time, in like a short-term way or in like a very localized way, I think the effects can be quite dramatic. But probably not as dramatic as we think. And here, like, I would give the analogy of like computers and digitalization, the internet. Like ultimately, there's a saying that technology moves at the speed of people, and I think that's ultimately still true. Like adoption cannot happen faster than the people adopt it or the organizations adopt it. And like looking at it historically, it's not very fast.
Well, like 2%. I didn't ask it in the Karpathy way of the global view, because for us in like our lifetimes, the difference between 2% and 12% is like absolutely the difference between like abundance in this world during our lifetimes or not, you know, even if you don't see it on the long-term chart. So like there, I'm just trying to calibrate, like internet is, I don't know what it is, maybe 0.5% or something. You think for the GDP growth there or something like that?
What do you think GDP is a good proxy for?
Well, that's an unnecessary part of this question, because I don't mean in the sense of, I mean it in a sense of an objective measure of our abundance. I'm just using GDP because it worked well enough for this example. And whether or not I agree with
let me put it in a non-GDP way. And I think I shared with you guys this discussion from the Long Now Foundation with this Google researcher, Blaise Agüera Yarcas, where, you know, very bullish AI, of course, because he works at Google, but he has a great take that I hadn't heard before, which he said that one of the things that significantly increased human well-being as a whole, as a species, was the internal combustion engine. And it's not just an issue of productivity, which obviously it happened, but he describes it in a way that I hadn't heard before, which is that it is effectively a way to externally metabolize hydrocarbons through machinery. This basically gives us new capabilities, and by giving us those new capabilities faster, and easier through experimentalization, it made it better for everybody. If what you care about, if the question that you care to answer is, will human well-being generally increase in the next 10 years because of this? Well, if these things actually create new capabilities for us that otherwise we wouldn't have, or allows us to execute our current capabilities much easier so that we don't have to worry about them and can just do something else, then yeah, the answer is likely to be that. But that would be what I would look for, basically. What is this potentiating for you that you otherwise couldn't do?
Yeah, I think to just add one thing, like I think from like a visceral experience standpoint, I think the difference between I can get more done in a shorter period of time to I can do something I couldn't before is a pretty big difference. And I think current AI already has that a little bit. Like it's easier to learn some new things with AI. Like you kind of have this like tireless mentor, those kinds of things. But in terms of like, please figure out like something that like humans have not been able to figure out. We're not quite there. There's some like very, very tentative examples, but there's bound to be low hanging fruit, because if you just average like human capability, there's going to be gaps that just haven't been paid attention.
And it's almost
I don't even care about that side. It's not to me about not figuring something out that we haven't figured out. I mean, the washing machine. We knew how to wash clothes before, right? But having a washing machine freed up so much time for women to just do whatever else they wanted, because they didn't have to do this whole process by hand. That changed things in society, right? To me, it's about that. Is this going to do something? Is something for us faster and easier, so we can no longer have to worry about that anymore? Basically, that would be my key thing. If this leads to, I don't know, reducing the level of CO2 that gets spewed in the atmosphere, beautiful, right? So that wouldn't even be my benchmark for general improvement.
I almost think the bullet case is like any improvement that's not really pushing the frontiers of engineering and science is still very peripheral improvement. Like that's kind of like internet level. Maybe you get 0.5% out of this thing more. But if you can actually like make progress on real science like that, then you start to get like pretty great outcomes. And you don't even have to get much. Like the LLMs are kind of unimpressive in some sense, because like a human with this level of knowledge, like if I had this level of recall and knowledge bank, I would assume I would like make progress on math problems to a very, very impressive degree very quickly. And it's just not capable of doing that. LLM and like, cause
but this comes back to Ricardo's point. So like, whether the LLM makes progress or the LLM sort of frees time for a human to make progress, there's not much difference in terms of progress. But the degree to which it helps speed it up is the question, and I don't think anybody really knows that.
And then you mentioned that if it's just kind of like the internet, that it's not that big. I mean, these fucking things wouldn't exist without the internet. The main reason why these things exist because of the level of collaboration that the internet has enabled and the amount of generally available content for these things to feed off, right? Otherwise, you would have a very limited set of literature to feed.
Sure. Like internet is
one thing gets you the other, man.
It's still like internet is very impressive in terms of how much you think, or internet / software / like these kind of things, like how much they contribute to growth. Like the world would look very depressing if we didn't have any of those things like that. It does, like when I say 0.5%, like that's actually like a huge chunk of the thing already. Like it's very difficult to kind of make progress.
I gotta go though, so we can call it there. Thank you everybody for listening to your favorite crypto podcast where we discuss timely crypto topics. I'll just leave you with one thought. OpenAI, we're at 500 billion. Tether worth 500 billion. OpenAI makes a crap ton of losses every year. Tether makes a crap ton of profit every year. So take from that what you will.
What about Ethereum?
It's not good. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ciao.